Okay, welcome everybody. So glad to see you all for tonight's second installment of A Bride for One Night. Uh, it's really the book feels like it's getting juicier and juicier. Yeah, John, were you going to say something?
Yes, can this, the cover of this book is from a famous photograph by Ruth Orkin. And it was taken in 1951 in Italy.
Huh.
And if you look at the picture up closely, you can see the distress on her face.
Yeah.
And the larger photograph is with her walking by. It was not staged, with her walking by, and there's more Italian. It's taken in Italy, more Italian men, and they're making catcalls at her. And so I wonder why this photograph is on this cover and how it goes with the title of the book.
Yeah. Well, I think you just named it. Does anybody else know what I'm about to say in relationship to
Well,
tonight's
I have an
story?
idea, but I want to hear you say it.
Okay, well, let's say the blessing first, and then
Okay.
we'll jump in. But I love that you brought us that information because that photograph is so potent. Welcome, Lucy. Happy to see you. Great. And as I mentioned, a lot of our B'nai Mitzvah folks are next door in the other Zoom room with Rabbi Ruchi. So it's a littler group of us, but they'll get the benefit of the recording as well. So we'll take a little breath and arrive into the opportunity to share ideas and connect and laugh and be annoyed and grow, ultimately to grow together and with Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Great. Good. And so just before we get to tonight's story, I just wondered if anybody had any kind of like burning reflections on last week between now and then that they just felt like they had to get out on the table about the two stories that we looked at, or maybe you're just already on into the new episode.
It's all about the new story.
Okay, let's go. I just didn't want to miss anybody's. I know actually Janine sent me some really interesting comments about what was the connection between the two stories. And she talked about the role of intimacy and water and relationships. And I think actually there's a continued thread into tonight's stories as well, so we can stay with that. So let's put on in the parking lot John's question about this story, because in my mind it actually comes up in this week's story. So just to start it off, does somebody want to read the selection from Baba Metzia from the Masechet, the section of Talmud where this story comes?
Marsha. Page 15.
Yes, page 15.
Okay, the other side. One day, Rabbi Yohanan was swimming in the Jordan River. Rish Laskish saw him and thought he was a woman. He jumped into the Jordan after him, dropped his spear in the water, and leapt to the other side of the river. When Rabbi Yohanan saw Rabbi Shimon ben Lassisk, he said to him, "Your strength should be for Torah." Rish Laskish said to him, "Your beauty should be for women." Rabbi Yohanan said to him, "If you will repent, I will give you my sister, who is more beautiful than I am." Reish Laskish accepted the arrangement. He tried to retrieve his possessions, but he was unable to do so.
Great. Marcia, do you want to keep going? Go from there?
Rabbi Yohanan taught him Torah and Mishnah and made him into a great man. One day they were debating in the study house, the sword, the knife, the hunting spear, the hand sickle, the harvesting sickle. At what stage do they become impure? That is, at what stage in their production do they shift from being raw materials, which are not susceptible to impurity, to vessels that may contract impurity? And they answered, from the time they are completed. And when are they regarded as completed? Rabbi Yohanan said, when they are refined in the furnace. Reish Lakish said, when they are polished with water. Rabbi Yohanan said, a thief knows the tools of his trade. And Reish Lakish said, and what good have you done for me? There, among the robbers, they called me master. And here, among the sages, they call me master. Rabbi Yohanan said, I have not done any good for you at all. Rabbi Yohanan's spirit grew weak. Reish Lakish grew ill.
Great. And maybe Maxine or Joan, does anybody, or Lucy, anybody want to take the next, or Ellen? Ellen, yeah.
I can do it, Maxine.
Super.
Okay. Rabbi Yohanan's sister came and cried before him. She said to him, look at me. He did not pay attention to her. She said, look at these children who will be orphans. He said to her, leave your orphans, I will sustain them. From Jeremiah 49:11. She said to him, for the sake of my widowhood. He said to her, and let your widows trust in me. From Jeremiah 49:11. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish passed away. Rabbi Yohanan grieved very deeply. The rabbi said, what will we do to bring him comfort? Let us send Rabbi Elazar ben Pedar to sit before him, since he is a brilliant scholar. They brought Rabbi Elazar ben Pedar before Rabbi Yohanan. In response to everything that Rabbi Yohanan would say, Rabbi Elazar ben Pedar would say to him, here is a text that supports you. Rabbi Yohanan said, do you think I need this? Whenever I used to say something to Reish Lakish, he would pose 24 objections, and I would give him 24 solutions. But you just say to me, here is a supporting text. Don't I already know what I said was correct? Rabbi Yohanan would walk about the graves of Tiberias and cry, Reish Lakish, where are you? Until he lost his mind. The rabbis prayed for mercy for him, and his soul came to its final rest.
Goodness. Oh, Ellen, I just see your note. Let me, I just sent them to Marcia as well. Let me just send them over to you. So you have. So initial comments about the text itself, and what did you notice?
I'm going back to the beginning here.
Okay.
Reading the beginning, I'm sorry, I've lost my thought here. Oh, I know. What struck me was when they were talking to each other, the two men were talking to each other. Rabbi Yohanan says, if you'll repent, I'll give you my sister, who is more beautiful than I am. It's another one of those examples of women's worth at that time.
Mhm. Yeah. So if I can, let me just kind of, and Dr. Calderon does an amazing job of this, but let me just give you a little bit of how I read this section of Talmud. So this, of course, is called Agadah. This is kind of a narrative sidebar in a larger conversation. And Baba Metzia is about reparations, usually financial reparations for an incident, a crime, a misdemeanor, something like that. So within that conversation of how do we make amends, how do we restore justice, we find this narrative. So that's one note about the context of where this is set. And what we find here is this, the river, first of all, the River Jordan, which plays, of course, a huge role in Israel. And as there's not much water, it's interesting that this scene takes place in the middle of a river, in the middle between boundaries, between places. And so even the title itself, The Other Side, has kind of a unique poignancy when really they're in the middle of the river, both of them, but they're coming from each different sides of the riverbank. And then you have this very sexy scene, in my opinion, of this opening scene where, you know, this pirate, Reish Lakish, sees this young, beautiful, Dr. Calderon uses the phrase of, white as the inside of an almond to describe how Rabbi Yochanan looked, and specifically how his arm radiated, which we'll come back to. So you have this very sexy, like slippery scene. And I'm using some of this to kind of exaggerate it a little bit. But then you have, he's dropping his sword in the river. I mean, it's all very sensuous, to say the least. And then they speak back and forth to each other in, again, a very, very sensual way of, basically saying, I want you, and it's weird. And the other one saying, I want you too, and it's weird. And I love that, because there's so few, it's a conversation within a conversation.
Mhm.
And what it does is give you a sense of their interiority. And one of the unique things that I got from this chapter was, and I'll just share with you, it's on the very back page of the story itself, page 30, where she writes, well, at the top, she says, what experiences shape and define a person? Which is, very, very powerful question. And then at the bottom of the first full paragraph, she says, everything begins with the personal. Theory and ideology only come later. And this story is deeply personal, deeply intimate. It's about the intimacy with oneself, right? In order to kind of know where does your mojo lie? And then the intimacy in sharing with another. And then the other thing I just wanted to point about the text itself is this last line, which, what you'll see is she's basically doing a midrash on this text, or the way Rashi would read the text. And one of the things that Rashi is doing is scratching at certain words for meaning and looking for gaps within the narrative. So one of the gaps that you might not have seen initially, but that Dr. Calderon picks up on, is this notion of he tried to retrieve his possessions, but he was unable to do so, right? You would probably read that to yourself and think, what is, who cares? But it implies so many things. One of which is, he's in the river and can't go back to get whatever, where the sword, to go back to those, the other bandits, whatever it was. But there's a way in which the flow of the river kind of takes him to a different location. And she talks a lot about this retrieving of your possessions. And it becomes a place of identity and kind of consciousness, in addition to just his stuff or his sword. And then the other thing to really star is, or to ask when reading a section of Talmud is, what is the question that they are trying to answer? Because Talmud will look for cases, case studies, scenarios, and pinpoint a question around which they will pick apart and debate. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
It's like one of my teachers, Rabbi Eben Leader, would talk about it as a fault line, that they try to find a fault line around which to kind of push and pull. So the fault line, can anybody guess what the fault line is in this section of text? The question, and it's actually posed as a question here.
When are the tools purified?
Exactly.
At what point?
Yeah, at what stage in their production did they shift from being raw materials, which are not susceptible to impurity, to vessels that contact impurity? And when specifically are they done? And Lucy, why do you think that's the fault line?
That's- I'm
Sorry.
sorry. Go on.
Well, what really came to me here was the water, right?
Mhm.
Reish Lakish. Oh, when they're in the water, he's going back to that time in the river, and Yohanan, it's hard to say, like, she makes an excuse, I think, in her story for Rabbi Yochanan, but really, I just really thought about the energy between two, Haruta buddies, where you're studying together and you're just filled with this holiness and the knowledge, and sometimes, that relationship, for whatever reason, will go sideways, and it's like as though it were a divorce. It's just really a ripping of, the soul in some ways, or the heart. But anyway, I thought it was very interesting that Reish Lakish, he wanted to go back, to that moment in the water where they met and connected at a deep soul level. But Yohanan wouldn't go there, and instead became very insulting.
Mm-hmm. Right, and the fire. Go ahead, Marcia.
Is Torah. She says that, and it's the other thing that struck me earlier was their meeting in the middle of the river. Mm-hmm. And for me, this book is a lot about, or this story is a lot about identity, but it's also about balance, and that neither of them are balanced, except, I think, in that moment in the middle of the river when they first come together. And after that, things are in balance, are unbalanced.
Mm-hmm. Right, and the imagery you're using also, they're balanced against one another. Like, right. One of the concepts of what it means to be a chavruta, a study partner, is, and what it means to be in a marriage or spousal relationship, is this idea of kenegdo. It's such a good kenegdo, and it's against, but it's really kind of this this trampoline of against, because it moves. There's a tension, there's a polarity there in the kenegdo, and it's very obvious in this studying the amount of eros that comes about with Torah study. And right. if you've ever had the opportunity to learn in a chavruta, regardless of the gender, and it's actually almost genderless, it's just this primal thing that goes on over you know, about, because of you're studying this like sacred, you know, fiery, juicy text, and it's hot.
Mhm.
And there's you know, Yentl, the story of Yentl is not far-fetched,
Right.
because it's, you can't help in some ways but fall in love with who you learn Torah with. And that love
Yeah.
is complicated, but it's
Yeah.
because you're seeing the intimacy of one another.
And I just would love to,
Yeah.
know why Rabbi Yochanan would bring up that, Reish Lakish was a thief. What deep, something in his psyche
Yeah.
took him to that place to do something which was really inappropriate culturally and in terms of becoming a Torah scholar. You would never bring up the past. I mean, you just
Yeah.
wouldn't, but something so deep.
Joan, yeah.
I think he was very disillusioned because Reish Lakish claimed to be a master over, I mean, still a master. That was his big claim. And I think Rabbi Yochanan was very disappointed that he would assert so much ego, maybe.
You mean Reish Lakish was disappointed that Rabbi Yochanan kind of carried out this masterful kingship? Is that what I just didn't know which
No,
person was upset?
I read the story, but I didn't read the midrash. But Reish Lakish said he was a master among thieves and now among Torah scholars, right?
Right.
And so he was asserting his mastery over everything. And I think Rabbi Yochanan was very disillusioned with that.
I
And
see.
maybe that's why he lashed out in the way that he did, because he was so heartbroken.
Right. Yeah, I think, Joan, that's a powerful read, especially if you haven't read her commentary. Good for you for taking that on. So let's go into her commentary a little bit and look at kind of the setup. And remember, this is all curation. You know, what details she'd choose to put in, what elements about their personalities, about the scenes. I felt like I was watching the movie Amelie, you know, where she gives the description to the blind person of, you know, and there's the tomato cellar and this and that. I mean, there's such a caricature of or not even, you know, a caricature of the space and the place and the bustle and the hustle. Yeah, so what did you notice about the setup of why she chose to include what in the setup of this story? And Joan and Ellen, did those pictures come through?
I can't see them right now.
Oh, okay. It's on the email just in case. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, the scene, just to make sure everybody's in, is, you know, is Reb Yochanan kind of walking around in these Torah scholar cloaks, like very like the master. And so I was curious, Joan, how you described it, because it's true. Reb Yochanan used to be top dog until Reish Lakish came to town, for sure.
So jealousy became a factor
Mm-hmm,
in this.
I don't know. I guess I have a different read. I think, yeah, I don't know. I mean, of course, when you write your stories, you put in whatever you want. So, our author has put a lot in. But in the Talmud itself, it doesn't say. So we can, I guess, attribute it to anything we want.
Well, Lucy, I think that's a powerful point. But one thing that we do know is the kind of description of these men from other places. Like, it's very accurate in terms of the setting that she portrays. It's not like a Hollywood kind of inflation. In fact,
Right.
one of the things that I also want to mention is, Talmud replaced the temple in many ways. Talmud became the repository for all the kind of Jewish energy of the day, and study became the role of sacrifice and the role of kind of offering. And so this scene that you have of, I think she paints it in Tiberia,
Yeah.
which is, it's kind of the outposts. But you have this scene in which Torah scholars are elevated to this place of kind of royalty, which, we can't even imagine. I can't even imagine. But it used to be that way. And then, Lucy, kind of building on what you were saying, there was another very personal detail about Reb Yochanan, about his character and his biography, that she brings in and kind of expands upon. There were a few details there. Does anybody want to throw some of those out?
Yeah, the death of his child. All his children, right? I mean, has
the death of 10 children.
Oh.
While
10
his daughter and the thief are making babies like crazy.
his sister.
Yeah.
Oh,
Not
I'm
his-
sorry, his sister.
His sister.
Yeah. And the sister had been somebody who he, considered his confidant, his kind of, his chavruta, who didn't have the learning, but had the heart, and the beauty. Remember that whole scene of the kind of trading of beauty. It's almost like, I just continue to picture, when Rachel is having sex with Isaac, and Leah is, or Rachel and
Jacob.
Jacob, thank you.
Jacob.
Rachel and Jacob. Anyway, and Leah's, just salivating over the whole thing. And some of the midrash says she's under the bed. It's like that same sense of like, I feel like Reb Yochanan's a little bit under the bed.
Yeah, good point.
With this. So yeah, the 10 children, and that's used in very powerful ways. So so we'll come back to that in a second, but let's just build Reish Lakish up a little bit and try to understand his persona. So he, like Joan actually pointed out, he becomes like a mascot of the Beit Midrash. He definitely takes on, there's a whole new energy that's brought in because of him. And this, I just also want to say, is the nature of Torah study. Like, when someone new comes into the Beit Midrash, it's like somebody's dropped a pebble in a sea, and the ripples totally change. It's like alchemy. Marcia, I saw your nod.
I was just going to say, and he was a leader. Granted, they were highwaymen, but still, he was a leader, and they had a certain code of ethics, and he goes from a powerful position in the group, the most powerful position in the group, to, at the beginning at least, the lowest. He's the new kid in class, and the other students in the beginning are not really giving him much attention or respect. And that had to be a blow to his ego somewhere.
Literally, yes. Hi, Annette, welcome. So glad you're here. Annette, do you also need the text?
No, I have the book. I'm
Oh,
sorry
good.
about being so late. I
Okay,
had
good.
an emergency call.
No, I hope everybody's okay.
Me too.
So we're talking about the kind of portraiting of Reish Lakish and Rebbe Yochanan, and how they're painted within Dr. Calderon's, portrayal of them. Right. So I think you're spot on, Marcia. There's definitely there's a topographical change for both of them. Rabbi Yochanan used to be, top dog, and then there's this kind of new kid, and the change of the power dynamics within the Beit Midrash. There's one line on the top of 21 that I found was really interesting about Rabbi Yochanan. She says, well, I'll just read. Does somebody want to read that paragraph that starts on the bottom of 20? There's so much in it.
Rabbi, I read
Yeah.
digitally and the page numbers don't actually
Oh,
help,
okay.
which is interesting. But
Okay.
it would be good if you read the first line of what you're thinking.
Oh, sure.
'Cause I'm close, but I don't know what the paragraph is.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. It's at times Rabbi Yochanan feared his new student.
Okay.
You want to keep going from there?
Sure. At times, Rabbi Yochanan feared his new student because when Reish Lakish got angry, he would switch unconsciously to the voice of a gang leader. Sometimes his fist was clenched as if he were about to hit someone, and there would be a moment of fear. On his way to and from the study house, Rabbi Yochanan found himself imitating Reish Lakish's jaunty stride without noticing it. He would wake up in the morning with dreams of Reish Lakish still fresh in his mind. His legs carried him back and forth again and again to visit with his sister, but his thoughts were always elsewhere. Do you want me to keep going?
Well, what do I
You
know?
get the idea.
What do you all make of that? Because within that, I found it kind of encapsulates the complexity of these relationships and the triangles. Like,
He's kind of obsessed.
he's obsessed. Yeah, and yet he's terrified. Right?
Yeah,
The beginning talks about
But that's part of the attraction, don't you think?
totally.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of attraction between these two.
Yeah. And same with the sister. When she comes into the mix, it talks about how, here she was, this kind of saltine or whatever they call it, like very no taste wafer. I don't know isn't there an expression about like, I was going to say parve, but there's some English
Bland.
expression. Yeah,
Yeah.
bland. Yeah, like very bland. And then, here's this hot pirate. Johnny Depp comes to town and they make all these babies. And meanwhile, Yochanan's babies are dying.
Well, there's that whole potency thing again.
Yeah. Yeah, and on the next page on 22, when the sister marries, and the sister is never named, which I found really interesting. It's always just his sister, because the importance of the relationship is more, and this is how I took it, is more paramount than her name, which is often the case, in Torah. The kind of but it's interesting. So under the wedding canopy, Reb Yochanan's lips moved along with him in terms of saying the Sheva Brachot, the seven blessings. So in some way, he was also marrying his own sister.
Or he was marrying Reish Lakish.
Or a Reish Lakish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Or both.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. And then he was given a new name, which of course is a very, Jewish kind of announcement of life transition. Yeah. And what else are you seeing? Annette and Ellen and Joan, what are you making of all of this?
I was trying to find my unmute button there. To me, he was so enveloped in a jealousy. He really wanted to maybe have this ultra life, and he was living it in the eyes of the gang leader.
So Reb Yochanan wanted to be the pirate.
Yeah. That's why
Ooh,
he would voice himself, find himself using a rough voice or however they had said
yeah,
that.
in imitating him. Yeah, that's a great point. Right, maybe it was more about they wanted to kind of be, take on the role of each other. And that was a big piece of the intimacy. That's so cool. I never would have thought of Rabbi Yochanan kind of wanting to be that bandit, but we all, grass is greener. We all want what's on the other side.
I think
Yeah,
it shows too how we influence one another, our most intimate relationships, and maybe Rabbi Yochanan, he expected to influence Reish Lakish, but here too he was being influenced. Like others have said, he's taking on some of his qualities.
yeah, I think that's very powerful. I mean, we all know that's so true. Like when you begin to dress like your significant other, or talk like them, or, walk like them, all of that. Yeah. What's with this arm of Reb Yochanan being radiant? On page 24, in the middle, at the paragraph of years past, Reb Yochanan also got married. His arm was still radiant, but his face was dark. What is this arm? Is that his sword?
Mm.
Is that his?
Mhm.
Because we first find the kind of radiant arm in the water,
Right.
right? The water, it's sticking out. And I don't know, maybe it's the arm that he thought was the woman. Maybe it's like a particularly beautiful arm that couldn't be that could be considered a woman or a man, because a head or a face definitely, well, you never know, but I don't know, the arm just really stands out to me. And he rarely smiled. And then right after that, it says, it was rumored that everywhere Reb Yochanan went, he carried in the pocket of his cloak the tiny bone of his 10th son who died. That to me was a big kind of like soundtrack change right there.
Yeah, he's almost like he's lost his mind.
Well,
Yeah.
he had so much grief losing all these sons, but he couldn't get beyond it. He was carrying this bone like a talisman, it didn't seem to me, well, to say it's not healthy is kind of an understatement, but it was his grief and his bitterness made manifest,
Mhm.
it was the physical symbol of his grief and his growing bitterness that he'd lost his sister's adoration. He'd lost his children. He'd lost his top spot as the big man on campus,
Yeah.
And these were all blows to his ego and to his identity. And he had seen himself as deserving of all the good things in his life because he was such a great scholar and a holy man, as it were, But as years went by, the man who had the sons, the man who had the attention from the other scholars, the man who had the rabbi's sister's passionate love, not an intellectual thing, but passion between them.
Mhm.
And there's no indication that the rabbi's wife and he had passionate relationship. There was a lot for him to be bitter about.
Yeah. Got married to a woman from a good family.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't makes my cheeks blush. Joan, yeah, go ahead.
I have a peculiar question. The question that he posed about,
Can you all hear Joan okay? Because somehow,
Not
No,
well.
okay, it's like a robot, like is chopping.
oh, I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix it. Should I keep
Well,
going?
yeah, say it. I mean, I can kind of get it, but I just wish you could, but keep going.
Okay. So the question he posed about the implements when they are finished or when they are complete, could
Yes.
that be about human identity, or when is a human finished? When is
Yeah,
the human completely created? Can that be?
absolutely. Did you all, should I,
Yes, I say it.
Joan said, the question about when is the instrument complete? She asked, is that also a question about human evolution or development? When are we complete as people? Did I capture it okay, Joan?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and absolutely, like, and remember, it's not just to be complete, but the question going back to the Talmud is, at what point can the item become impure? So, Jewishly, anything that is porous can become impure and not become kosher again. Whereas something that is like steel, you can kosher it, you can make it kosher again. But this idea of not being finished implies that if it's trafed up, if it's made unholy, it can't be reversed. So this notion of completion is a big deal, because if something's complete, even if you screw it up, you can unscrew it. But if something is not complete, it doesn't have a way to recover itself. So I just want to point us to on page 25. So the conversation in the Beit Midrash turns a bit hostile. And they don't rise when Rabbi Yochanan, circles around. In the paragraph starts, Reish Lakish aches for the knife on page 25. Does anybody see that one?
Mhm.
Does somebody, Maxine, do you want to read that?
Sure. Reish Lakish aches for the knife that he abandoned on the bank of the Jordan. It was once almost an extension of his arm. For a moment, he clenches his fists and then he relaxes them. He looks at his handsome teacher who has suddenly been rendered ugly by his jealousy, but his heart is still in his master's thrall.
So what do you make of this? Because this is the paragraph, this is the setup before Ben Lakish, which is a switch, right, from being identified as Reish Lakish. You notice it's like a Jacob Israel moment right there in how she writes their names, or the same person's name. So why do you think that's set up before this question of what good did you do for me? What's he asking of himself or Rabbi Yochanan, or pointing out?
In some ways, Rabbi, that's a rhetorical question. He doesn't want an answer. It's more of an insult.
I see.
Well, I think he's sort of protecting himself and refuting their relationship. Both of them are refuting their Torah study. And so we immediately know that both of them will be taken because they're not, they've lost their way. They've left their path. But if I said to my partner of 40 some years, what good did you do for me? Whew, wow. And if my partner answers, I didn't do you any good at all, I mean, it's done, right? It's over.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I think so. Part of the message here is not so much what good did you do for me? He was like saying, I was a master of my robbers or whatever they were, the pirates. And now I'm a master of my Talmud studies. So what difference have you done for me? I'm a master no matter what.
Mhm.
And I think he's just trying to erase that jealousy moment.
Mm.
He's trying to get back into the graces.
So you see that, Annette, as Reish Lakish kind of trying to soften Rabbi Yochanan.
Yeah, to figure out.
Interesting.
Because he's now ugly in his eyes, and that's not what he wants to see.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, to me that what good did you do for me is such an interesting formulation of a sentence. It's in the negative, but it's about good. And
But I think maybe he wanted an answer. I mean, like a real answer. What more did you do for me than make me a master?
Mm-hmm.
And I think he wants an answer. He doesn't want, I didn't do you any good at all. He wants to reconnect with the rabbi. He wants to know that bond again.
Yeah.
And how does he do that? He wants the rabbi to tell him something that erases all that hurt.
Like, you became a wonderful scholar. I've taught you all this beautiful Torah. You've refined your life. You've had a beautiful family. Something. Is that where you're? I think that's powerful.
Yes, but he's never lost that
loving feeling,
adoration of the rabbi. He's never lost his feelings. He loves him.
Yeah.
He wants him to take back all that he's hurt and say something loving that will make it all right again.
And it's really interesting along the same lines, because I agree, that's where I was going with it. But it says, what good did you do for me? Ask Ben Lakish. So they're using his more formal or his new name as opposed sort of what you were alluding to before, Rabbi. So there's definitely a switch over.
And he's saying it quietly. He's not saying it angrily.
It's like entreating him, isn't that the word?
Yes.
Entreat. Well, yeah. And when you said that, both of you, so Ben Lakish is the son of Lakish. So his new name is actually almost like a iterative rebirth of the same person.
Right.
which is really interesting. I never thought about that. And then we have this imagery, of course, of Reb Yochanan when he says, I didn't do you any good at all. He puts his hand in the pocket of his cloak, fingering the bone of his dead son. Heartbreaking. It almost feels like, Moshe grieving Miriam and, striking the rock. It's like this kind of,
It is.
unspeakable violence that is caused because of grief.
Yeah. Traumatic.
Betrayed by God.
Try that again, Joan.
I think she said,
Sounds like Rabbi Yochanan feels betrayed by God.
yeah, Rabbi Yohanan feels betrayed by God.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important, Joan, that you brought God into all of this, because right, the kind of devotion of Torah scholars is devotion to the text, but there's often the, devotion to God as almost through the text itself. So he was betrayed also by Torah. Oy vey. Yeah. And then the sister comes back and she kind of storms into the Beit Midrash. Brother, make your peace with him. Don't leave me alone. You married me off. To him, don't let him die because of your anger. I'm too young to become a widow. I love him. You love him.
Personally, that really threw me because, I mean, all of a sudden he's dying because of this. I just couldn't seem to wrap my head over what just happened.
But he couldn't study anymore. He couldn't learn anymore. He couldn't be the rabbi anymore.
Correct, but they're talking about Reish Lakish. I understood it if it was the rabbi, but it's not. It's Reish Lakish who's dying.
But Reish Lakish has lost himself as a highwayman, and now he's lost himself as a scholar, and so he doesn't have a self. He doesn't have someone to be anymore, and you can't live any kind of life if you don't know who you are anymore.
That's a good perspective.
No, my husband was a policeman and he died in the line of duty. And I worshiped him. And if it had not been for my daughter, I would have died. I was in the hospital dying. But I didn't die because of my daughter, but I would have died. I know I would have.
Thank you for sharing that. And I can see why you're making that connection in this story. And that's excellent. Thank you.
What was his name, Marcia?
I'm sorry to, Debbie Downer. That's me.
No, not at all. How long ago was that, Marcia?
50, I was 28. So what is that? Yeah, 50
Yeah.
something.
Wow.
80 something.
Yeah, I mean, traumatic grief is very deep, and it's so deep that it can sever the connection to life.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I think that's what happened to both of them.
yeah, I
Mhm.
agree. they lost their way. You know, a lot of this, it's hard to read this just as though they were people like us, you know.
Yeah.
There's a lot of metaphor and different archetype is a Greek word, so it doesn't feel right, but it's the Hebrew equivalent. Rabbi, what is the Hebrew equivalent of an archetype? But you know, here's these
The golem.
archetypes.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's what she says. Rabbi Yochanan wanted a friend, but instead he created a golem. I mean, he created this kind of, you know, empty superpower.
Powerful, right? Right.
And they created, I think it was Joan maybe who said, you know, they created each other. They recreated each other and then they destroyed each other.
Yeah.
And this notion, I'll just end, we can, you know, if anybody else wants to final word, but this notion of chavruta, you sharpen, the image of chavruta is you sharpen each other's swords with your questions. So when Reish Lakish, you know, when they brought this new schlepper in, he wasn't sharp at all on any level. And so Reb Yochanan's strength, you know, his knife became dull as well, because there was nothing to sharpen it on. And so Annette, when you said, you know, how dramatic, I think it's both metaphor, but it's also, you know, as Marcia profoundly shared, there's such truth to the intensity of love.
Well, the water and the fire, you know, this who's
Yeah.
gonna, you know, put out who, right? These are two opposing forces
Yeah.
that you know, are both very strong, and either the water's gonna drench the fire or the fire's gonna evaporate the water. They can't be side by side. They don't mix. And yet, you know, when you put them together, it's fantastic. But then there's nothing.
Yeah, and she leaves it, I think she leaves it in an interesting place. She says in the last full paragraphs, if Reish Lakish had been able to go back and take his knife and enter his new life armed with his trusty weapon, their encounter could have been more fruitful. You know, that in some way there was a missing piece that never allowed him to be an integrated whole. So it's just interesting that she left it there.
Yeah, he gave up too much.
Yeah. Everybody, thank you so much for being on. I just am so glad. What a rich conversation. I thought for next week, tell me your thoughts, but I was thinking we would do 2 next stories. It's a little bit, if we only do 1, I think it's too short. And I think if we did 2, so it would be doing Beloved Rabbi and Libertina for next time. And we'll see, you know, how we go, but that's where I would, and that way we can do the 4th class and at least get the Bride for a Night in there.
Good.
Okay,
How many classes do we have?
4 total. We can, I mean, we can maybe extend, but at least for now, we'll stick with the 4.
Yeah, then we have to clean our kitchens. So
right, yeah, we need a little. Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Laila Tov, everybody.
Good night.
All right, thank you.
Bye.